The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining. My name is Mike Weaver, and I'm one of the product owners here at Quadratech. I oversee our email migration and PST elimination products here at Quadratech. Before joining, I came from industry as an exchange subject matter expert, and in these roles, I ran successful PST elimination projects and also had a focus on mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by the PST Eliminator and also our CEO, Thomas Madsen. Thomas, hello.
Hello. So maybe a little bit of historic background why I'm here today. So before I became a CEO, I've overseen as a project manager and consultant a lot of PST projects and even some very, very large and complex projects with lots of data, lots of involvement from legal, lots of nervous networking people and first level support being on the sticks during the migration. And so this was 2 years ago, but my heart's still here. It is getting those PST files out of the way, get them killed, hence my nickname, the PST Eliminator. And I'm excited for being allowed back in here to talk about PST files and how to solve it, and joined by Mike, our product owner, and probably as passionate about killing PST files as I am. Back to you, Mike.
I'm happy to take second place in that competition there.
No.
Before we get started, though, let's talk about a couple pieces of housekeeping. To ensure a good quality audio experience, all lines are currently muted and will be throughout the webinar. However, we'd love to address your questions at the end. Thomas and I love good Q&A sessions. Please send them to us using the questions feature on the right toolbar. We have members of the Quadratech team standing by to help collect the questions throughout the session. If we run out of time, we'll reach out to you to answer your question. With that, Thomas, do you want to go over today's agenda?
Yes, so we have an agenda here which is very aggressive. We do want to talk a little bit about Quadratech. I'm always like, that's not what really interests you, so Mike has promised to keep it under 3 minutes. We want to talk about what are your options, ask you to get rid of these, so this is about a quick review of the problem and then talk about the options that you have. What are the common problems? What are the top issues? What are the things you need to be concerned about? And how can you actually prepare for that? And then we want to cover short, what do we have for solutions? And then going over to a question and answer, as Mike said, ask any questions. You have a lot of expertise here on this call that could maybe help you. So back over to you and your 3 minutes.
All right, my 3 minutes. I hope to come out under the 3 minutes. So here at Quadratech, we have three major groups of products. One is in the monetize category, the grow and adapt, and optimize. When we say monetize, this is moving legacy data systems into Office 365 or on-prem Exchange. And this is where we have some automation around the MRS service using our Mailbox Shuttle product, which drives directly into our archive migration product, Archive Shuttle. Archive Shuttle helps move legacy archive systems like Veritas Enterprise Vault and EMC Source 1 today, and that a little later. But again, this is a category of moving legacy data into a modern platform. In the grow and adapt, so this is customers that are going through probably a merger, acquisition, or divestiture, or have multiple Office 365 tenants, and that's where Cloud Commander comes in to help handle Exchange, OneDrive for Business, Teams, and SharePoint. And finally, the optimized stage. So this is for organizations that are already on Office 365, either multiple tenants or one tenant, and this is allowing doing reporting, data analytics, also allowing you to do service monitoring, delegate administration, policy control, and even adoption programs. And the one last piece I'll talk about is the Office 365 lifecycle, and that's really our main focus here at Quadratech, whether you are starting to use Office 365 or you're in there today dealing with merger, acquisition, and divestiture challenges, or just trying to get better control over your investment that you've made into the service. So Thomas, hopefully I did that in less than the 3 minutes. I think I came in under, and I'm going to turn it back over to you.
You came in a lot under. It was 1 minute and 40 seconds, so very good.
All right, perfect.
Very clear. So let's talk about where did the PST files come from. Believe it or not, PST files are a 20-plus-year-old technology. It was first created in 1996 when a top notebook had 16 megabyte, not 16 gigabyte. and there was definitely no SSD in it. It was built because of the need to offload the Exchange servers and to reduce the network load. But we're now 20 years later, and even if Microsoft delivered a solution in the later half of 2010 and a really good one in 2013, they are still around, even though they're not really needed, and they carry a lot of challenges and a lot of risk. So if we go to the next slide, we talk about what is it actually. So what are they? They are database files stored on local computers, network drives, removable media. You will not believe what we have found PST files. They hold email data, and a lot of you think about mail, but a lot of people actually keep calendar and contacts and other, content inside of the PST files. And as we talked about, they're used to offload the email from the server, and also to, kind of for the user say, I have my local copy. I can, do whatever I want with it. It's out of control, and it is a commonplace to, recoup your email quota as well, because a lot of companies have had email quotas on their systems, which means you don't want to delete it. So we're hoarders, let's keep it. And what do you put it? You put it in PST files. And when you're really clever, you understand that you have a lot of, corruption, so you make copy of it. So before I get more into why PST is the problem, let me hand that over and let Mike cover why PST files are a problem.
So when we talk about the problems with PST files, it really falls into three major categories: data loss or missing files, e-discovery issues, and just that they're not user-friendly. When we talk about data loss and missing files, this is a large category. PSTs are rarely backed up. And what's interesting is the opposite problem is organizations are now dealing with that they're only backing up workstations because of PST files. So there's two pieces to that. The first being that PSTs are normally and only supported by Microsoft on local workstations. We know this isn't true in reality, but this is what is technically the situation. And traditionally, this is exactly what PSTs were designed for, is to take data off of the server, which is really expensive, and put it on the local workstation. Thomas talked about that a few moments ago. However, these are not typically backed up, and that can cause a really large challenge when it comes to these files going missing devices, and so on. The other challenge is as organizations have adopted Office 365 and adopted OneDrive for Business or Box or some of these other end-user storage solutions, they have had to continue to back up workstations if that was their policy because of these PST files and the criticality they are to the organization. So there's two pieces to that first part. The second piece is PSTs get corrupted. I said earlier that Microsoft only supports PSTs technically on local devices. We all know that that's not reality. In a lot of cases, they are on network locations. As these PSTs have gotten bigger, they get more and more prone to corruption. As they get on network drives, they get prone to even more corruption. And as we've gotten to new versions of Outlook over the last several years, Outlook communicates with these PSTs a lot more. So we've seen the corruption rate in our projects keep getting higher and higher and higher in these files. That can cause a really large challenge if suddenly one day you can't get into that 20 gig PST file that's got data back to the 90s in it. It's really important for the organization to protect that data. PST files don't provide any encryption. We know that we can put a password on PSTs, but PST files that are password protected because the file says they're password protected. It's very easy to crack the password or just tell the file it's not password protected and you can open it right up. So there's no protection for end users or organizations with password protected PST files. If you lose a PST file, it has a password, it still is a lost file and should be handled as a data loss event. The other challenge is these files are on local devices. Laptops fail, hard drives fail, they go missing, they end up in rivers, they end up just everywhere. We've all dealt with that craziness of the endpoints going missing. Because of this, if you're not backing up those devices, that is critical data that just walks out the door. We then have the nightmare, most organizations have encrypted laptops, but if you run into the situation where they're not encrypted, now you have the problem of a data loss event on top of it. We talk about e-discovery challenges. These files are everywhere, and trying to collect them for an e-discovery situation can be very difficult, especially if you're distributed. In order to read the PST file, you have to get all of the PST files related to that litigation, which is anybody that's part of that litigation. You have to get all those files, process them, then send them out to wherever they need to go, whether it's the other set of attorneys, your internal attorneys, or the courts. This is really a challenge, and it makes it very expensive, and it also can make you miss deadlines, because if that critical knowledge worker, salesperson, what have you, is out there traveling, selling business for you, and you're trying to collect their file, you may not meet your deadline. And this is part of a really expensive process for e-discovery. The other challenge is PST files can be used to circumvent retention policies. If you have a retention policy and you're enforcing retention on mailboxes and you allow PST files or still have them, you don't have a retention policy that's being followed. This allows users to side this situation, and they're not really probably doing it to be bad employees. They just have found that they need to keep their data here, and that's what they do. Or this is how they've been doing it since the 90s, and they just keep doing it. You have to have all of this data centralized and able in order to control it. And finally, these aren't user-friendly. Nobody likes these separate systems. We have an archive migration business where we get rid of archive systems, because at the end of the day, the users don't like their data being in more than one place at once, and us as technologists don't like that either. PSTs, you can't see them in Outlook Web Access or the Outlook app online. You can't see them on your phone. You have to have the device or be on the network to access them, and that's not how we do business anymore. That's not how users work. Now users have either on Outlook Web Access or on Citrix or on multiple virtual machines. Every day they come in and get a new virtual machine. Whatever it may be, this isn't how users operate anymore. The other problem are shared PSTs, which is supposed to not be a thing, but very much it is. And these are PST files that a small group of people are sharing on, and you know, they're calling around who's in the PST file. One person at a time goes in there, does their work, and leaves it. Unfortunately, there's a lot of powerful information in these, and it just creates workflow problems. So again, this is a real large problem and one that we run into quite a bit. So we talk about where we want to go with PST files. Regardless of the option that you choose, it's all about data centralization. And data centralization, we've all been part of these projects and initiatives. It's about reducing risk, increasing the risk of the reach of e-discovery tools. So again, allowing for that central place to protect your environment. All the data falls under retention policy. So if you have a retention policy, now it's all under that purview. If you want to set one up, you can do the data analytics to see what that impact is, and you can have an effective strategy. Today, if you have PST files in your environment, that's not a reality. And finally, which, you know, as technologists, again, we always want is we want our users to be happy. We want a simple user experience. And what's really nice is these are all positives of data centralization, specifically when it comes to PST files. These all work together. We get happy users, happy administrators, and reduced risk for the company. And what we find is this falls into 4 strategies, and Thomas is going to go over these 4 strategies that we see on how to handle PST files.
Yep. So you want to eliminate PST files. What are the options you have? You can categorize them into these kind of 4 main directions. The first one we call upgrade, and we call it upgrade because we're actually bringing the data home to Exchange or Exchange Online, i.e. Office 365. It's about removing the unneeded duplicated content. It's about migrating the leavers, files from all those users that left the company a long time ago. Handle the files floating around on shared drives, doing everything you need, but bringing it all home. And it's all going to be in the right place for discovery, governance, reduced operational costs. But we'll talk more about that later when we cover the pros and cons and the different options. The next option is the move. This is the move to a centralized archival storage system. There's a lot of those around that can actually store them, and they can be in the form of an on-premise solution, or they can be in the form of a cloud solution. These are, you know, another way of bringing them to another system. You still need to do what I talked about before, which is taking away the unneeded data, handling the deduplication, handle, you know, all these things, because you want to do it the right way, getting it into that new system. You also have an option that is very often one of the things that people choose to do simply because they don't know how to do it, or it just becomes too hard. It's the do nothing. Actually allowed to continue use of the files as usual. And this is just postponing the pain as we see it. But it is an option that you need to consider at that given point. The last option you have, of course, is delete. You could say there's nothing important, just go delete it after we've communicated. Now, that as we've seen, is a strategy that will lead to people panically trying to get it off, move it somewhere else, or we get network load boost of as soon as you send out the communication, everybody wants to copy it manually, right? Which is not very effective. So you have these two sub options here. One is option deleted soon, which kind of warn people, and the other one is that you want to lock it down that people can't add more information, but you would then expire the data after 7 years, and saying after 7 years. But then, as you will see later, we're still left with all the the challenges that you have. Now, which one you want to do really kind of depends on what's right for me, and what's right for me, it comes back into the business drivers, right? This could be about reducing the operational cost, in the sense of you want to do notebook, or you're moving to a higher degree of MAC files where PST files just doesn't exist. It could be you want to reduce the legal risk of data getting lost out there and being readable, even as Mike alluded to, having a password doesn't really mean it's secure. It could be in Europe to meet the governance requirements. If you have data that you cannot enforce governance on, or processes and procedures, then you end up, can't do anything. And if you want to have all the data in one place where you could say, I'm sure I deleted all the data from this user, right? Which in Europe, you have the right to be forgotten, right? You need to have it in the central place. Having PST files spread around is not going to help you. Or it's because of the discovery cost that you keep repeating, exporting, finding, and centralizing PST files for e-discovery. You can reduce it, and or increase the user productivity satisfaction, because you've got all the data in one place, you can search it in one go, right? Or it is to support some other technology project or upgrades, as I talked about before, which is the laptop, desktop, upgrade, or move to OneDrive, whatever it is. It is really about the cost versus benefit, or risk versus reward. One thing is important. If you just got one thing that's driving this, it's going to be very difficult to get this one finance. You've got to go look in all the different places and saying, does it make sense to invest and actually do that? And with that said, I want to hand back over to you, Mike, so you could talk a little bit about what are the pros and the cons of the different approaches we have.
Thanks, Thomas. So on this slide, we put the most common reasons why people come to us with their PST challenge, and we tried to help align that to the four strategies that we kind of see. And right off the bat, the do-nothing approach is really difficult. And a lot of organizations, a lot of people that are probably here, keep falling back into this. So we kind of have a lot of stalled projects with these that we see, where we all know we have to get rid of them, but getting funding or dealing with it kind of gets us back in this new do-nothing category, which unfortunately, except for the initial cost, is not quite good. When we talk about legal discovery, we again have upgrade, which is going to Office 365 or Exchange Online, move, going to a third-party archive system, or deleting. When we come to legal discovery, we kind of have the delete side shaded out there, because at first that can be a really large challenge or a really large risk, but at the end you'll end up in the same place because the data is centralized and you can search everything in a centralized manner. The way of getting there may not have been so well. We talk about the difference between move and upgrade. Move, when we talk about doing e-discovery, we really want to ensure that we're in a central system and not multiple systems. From a data loss prevention standpoint, deletion, if the data is not there, we don't have to worry about it going away. And then for move or upgrade, we're in a similar position. For workstations and upgrades, it's a similar story. Again, the data is not on the workstations for any of those other three, and therefore it is mitigated with that option. When it comes to user mobility, when we talk about upgrade, again, it's all in one place, as I mentioned earlier. When we talk about moving the data to a third-party archive, it depends on what that system is, and it depends what your users are used to. So if users are being introduced to a new system and that's where you're placing the PST files, that may not be the right outcome for solving that problem. The deletion piece, again, this is poor at first, but good in the end, or same in the end, so you have to be careful. When it comes to project costs, obviously do nothing temporarily is cheap. Deletion can be inexpensive, but you got to watch your help desk calls and the user impacts and all that org knowledge that you may inadvertently delete. So you got to be cautious with that phase when it comes to project costs and risks. We've highlighted that, and user experience, we've also highlighted that. However, when it comes to upgrade and move, usually the solutions are similarly priced when it comes to moving to a third-party system or a exchange system. The one thing we have to be careful of is what is your long-term strategy. So if you have a archive system today, or do you intend to always have that archive system? Or are you going to move it down the road? You really don't want to move data twice, particularly when usually you pay by the terabyte to move these systems or manage these systems. When it comes to risk, you're mitigating the PST risk by getting rid of the PST files. So again, with upgrade and move, that is mitigated. And user experience, the real standard, and I think what it comes down to is it just works. If you let users have all the data in one place where it belongs with a centralized experience, the user experience will prevail. And I think it's easier to handle a project when your users can see that end game. Whereas moving into a separate system, you've got two places again. So Thomas, do you want to talk more about these challenges as well? Thomas, we can't hear you.
That's because I'm on mute. Then it's really difficult to hear me. So as we heard that there's pros and cons here, but doing a project, there is some challenges here. And what you see listed is just some of the common struggles that you have. A successful project must include a balance between managing the complexities, minimize the end user, and get the cost level support of the business objective. And so what are the things you're going to deal with? 3 areas: backend handling, user impact, and infrastructure. If you look at the backend handling, there's identifying the right owner. So you may say, oh, that's not easy. It's easy because it's just in that user's directory. But we've seen a lot of companies where files are not only left from previous employees on the devices, but also that there's PST files spread all over the place, and finding the right owners is really critical. You do not want to have the wrong data ending up in the wrong mailbox because it's immediately available. Removing password. People have password, even though it's not protected, you need to do it as part of an automated process. The users cannot remember the password because they put it on years ago. Deduplication. Yes, users create copies. So what happens is the user will make sure, oh yeah, it gets corrupt, so let me make copies. And to reduce the data that's getting ingested, but also for user impact, as a user gets really confused if they have the same content showing up multiple times. So you need to do deduplication before you actually push it in. And so that leads to the user impact, which is, deduplication. But it's also, making sure you don't, affect the user productivity. People use PST files. That's why they're still around. It is their brain. It is their archive, right? And so you need to allow them access. They can find this information while you are, kind of moving the data. But you got to remember these files are attached to local profiles, and you need to remove those profiles across maybe even multiple devices, right? To avoid this flood of help desk calls and understanding what's going on. A lot of files are, corrupt. People don't see that because there are inconsistencies along the files, but as you migrate, you need to deal with that. So you can tell, these individual items could not be migrated, or these you could actually repair, right? And that needs to be handled automatically, else there's no way you'll ever finish a larger migration. The last one, of course, nervous network people, when you start moving 200, 300, 400 terabytes of data, because you don't want to make sure you don't kill the network, right? And that requires a lot of good, not only planning, but also good technology to make sure you do not kill the network, especially when you're spread across the globe and you have a lot of locations where you want to try to gather the data and put it into one single place, either in an archive system or it's at home, which is Office 365 for Exchange, right? And the last one in the infrastructure is something people don't think about, but when you're moving thousands of users PST files, you're going to get support calls from people getting confused, asking questions, and you need to be able to handle that, and also give those help desk people the tools they need to actually handle the situation. So it's a lot of this is the tooling and the capabilities of the solution that you are using that will be it. So what are your migration options, right? If you're a smaller company, you can do it manually, right? What is small? 100 users, 200 users, you could probably do it smaller. You get to 500, it's just impossible. You can use some free tools or the PST import service. The problem here is that you're very often dealing with, oh, we need to ship disk or we need to do something else, and it's just not very user-friendly, right? Or you go towards the third-party services like we have at Quadrotech. And no matter what, when you do these kind of like, you do it manually, you do it with free tools, you do it with third party, if you move on to the next slide, you see that you need a systematic approach to this. And it goes all the way from what we call the initial design, making sure you have the technical kickoff, you get all the people involved, you talk to network, you talk to legal and compliance, you talk to the e-discovery people, you talk to the people in finance, you talk to the operators of the servers. There's a lot of things, and then you need to think about the sizing and the process flow, how you want to do it. Initially, you also need to get a kind of like a view of how big is the problem, and Mike is going to talk a little bit about that when we get into what is the process that we use when you do that. You deploy the system, you install the modules. You don't need to have a presence on the devices, because as you move over, you need to be able to also, for example, remove the PST files after they've been successfully migrated. Else people will still have, the information and get really confused. You need to make sure it works end-to-end in your environment, because environments are different. You have different versions of Windows, you have different versions of Outlook. You've got to be able to manage that. Then you test and perfect it, which is report, review, and this is where Mike is going to talk a little about. You really need to understand how much data is where, because else you cannot do the wave planning, right? And you cannot get the right one. You need to do a fair amount of tests. You need to do business pilots, and then you move into production where you actually, run waves by waves, and you get back into daily handling. At the very end of it, you need to look at the results, of course, and here you really need a tool that has all the tracking, right? It has, individual item, individual PST files tracking of what did we actually do, so we know exactly from this PST files we had 22,000 messages. We actually migrated, 21,988, and we had, X that didn't migrate, either because they were too big. And you may say, how can that happen? We've seen people attaching, DVD files to PST files, and no target system, now the Office 365 or an old archive would take a 2.5 gigabyte file. So, and of course you then need to decommission the system and deal with all those leftovers. But you need a systematic approach, and it needs to be data driven. You need to understand what you have out there. It needs to be automated, both to support the user experience, but also more importantly to support the admin functions, right? So you've got to get that right. And you need experience in running these projects. And the challenge that you have, you will often only do these once, right? Which means how should you ever gain the experience? So our recommendation is work with either us or somebody that have experience in running these kind of projects. So if you want to talk a little bit about our process, Mike.
Yep, absolutely. So when we do our projects here, our software runs around these 5 steps. And this is software that we've developed over almost 15 years here. And it falls into 5 things. And just like any project, you start with the planning phase, or in our case, it's the discovery phase. And this is where we're going to go into the environment and we're going to search everywhere we possibly can and look for these files. We're going to look on desktops. We're going to look out at the network shares. We're going to look at any available removable media. And this is going to allow us to understand where the files are. But more importantly, we also have to understand who they belong to, who's using them. We can look at the Outlook profiles and see who has them actually attached and using them. Are they on the user's share, network share, the one they have, or is it on a group share? We can open it up and look at most common sender and receiver, things like this, so we actually know who that belongs to. Is it a terminated employee? Is it a shared PST? Whatever it may be. When we end this discover phase, we know where all the PST files are, who they belong to, and then as Thomas mentioned, that's how we can make a proper enablement plan so that we don't overwhelm network, we don't overwhelm your help desk, we don't overwhelm anyone. And that is what drives a lot of the rest of the steps here. Talk about centralized, we have 2 major components. One is our network centralization process, and one is our end user desktop centralization process. Both work together to allow the user to have access to the PST file while we're migrating it. So that allows the user to not be disrupted. They have read-only access. Life goes on while we're doing this centralization, moving it up into our server for processing. And that process can be interrupted, and we can control the amount of bandwidth that that user is using. So that allows the user to roam from site to site, undock, go to the conference room, come back, go home for the night, whatever it may be, but allows them to centralize that data. Once all that data is up on the server, we can process them. And this is where a lot of the magic happens. We can remove passwords. We can dedupe at the item level. We can back them up. We can get rid of corruption. We can do all sorts of things so that when this is done, the files are pristine, clean, ready to go into the target system. We then hit the migration phase. If Exchange or Exchange Online is a target, we've developed a proprietary process to stream this data into that mailbox or the archive as fast as possible into the service. We have projects, our record project is 5 terabytes of PSTs a day. However, most projects obviously run less than that. It depends how dedicated you are in your network setup. But with the proper focus, this project can move very quickly with proper planning. The final phase is cleanup. This is where we'll go in and we'll clean up the Outlook profiles and ensure that the user doesn't get any of those nasty error messages of the PST being pulled out from underneath them, and delete the file and close the risk. So that is our 5-step process. Before we go into question and answer, this is a really good ebook that has a similar tone to today where the focus is on the problem, but it does have, other options as well and more information on the PST import service and other things. And this is our great ebook on how to migrate PST files to Office 365. This will also be included in the materials that we send out. And I highly recommend checking out this guide. So with that, we did have a couple questions that came in. If you have questions, please continue to add to our questions in the right-hand toolbar. So let me just pull them up here. So Jason asks, how do you migrate PSTs that are stored in OneDrive for Business? Thomas, do you want to take that, or do you want me to take that one?
You can take that one. You get the honor.
Okay. All right. So PSTs that are stored in OneDrive usually are cached to the user's local machine if they're in use, or they're available to be recalled. And that allows us to do the scanning and locate them, and then we move them just like a regular file. And then when we do the deletion, it will then replicate up into Office 365 and go through the normal deletion process. So the discovery is usually in that point run by the end user's workstation, and that allows us to take care of those files so that you can do the proper discovery on them. Hopefully that answers that question. Mary asks, what is the biggest project that you've done?
Ooh, I think it was about 500 terabytes, over 100,000 users. And the interesting part here was that you have, of course, a lot of, departments involved. You need to make sure everybody gets their voice heard, and if you've ever, been in these kind of where everybody wants to talk about it, you need some real skills to get this project on its way. We were able to do this in a, 13-month period, right? And this was data that was spread all over the globe, right? And with different cultures, different versions of the desktop, different versions of communication, and a lot of duplicated data and a lot of data that was left over. And this is where most people say, oh, we don't have any of that. And you start getting out of the scanning and you're kind of like, oh, we got all these files on shared drives that we do not know who they belong to, or we need to go in and, do most common sender receiver. Or you have users with like 10 copies of the same file over the years, right? And you're not sure whether, which one has the right data. So the consolidation and deduplication is very, very handy at that large project. So very interesting project to talk about, which we can definitely talk more about. Any other questions, Mike?
Yep, we got one more from Tony. This one, like rapid fire, came in when we were going over the help desk, so I think we spooked Tony a little bit, but we get a lot of help desk calls on this. How many calls do you see in your projects?
Do you want to answer that one, Mike?
I think for sure. So I think our goal, so let's talk about the opposite. So there's some of those other strategies. One is just deleting the files or doing some of the manual work. We've had clients complain up to an 80% help desk volume, which is terrifying. by not using our tool or any tool. And each kind of layer that you add or option that you add is to reduce it. Our goal is to get it to less than 5%. And so when we talked about that planning phase, that's where we really talk about, that's one of the limiting factors in planning. And this should be every project. Everyone should be caring about help desk volume. And we care about this in our other projects as well. But really, the goal, the short answer is 5% or less is our goal. And we typically exceed that by quite a bit. And it's important to, just like any other preparation, ensure that the help desk has the right scripts, they understand what's happening. There's actually some self-service tools in the product that allows both the end user or the help desk to see where things are so that users have that information up to date and can either prevent help desk volume or at least enable first line support to be able to answer those questions.
I think just in a comment on that one, what I've seen, especially on the larger project, is that the fingertips, information that you're talking about, which file do the user have, which one have been migrated, which one are in, processing, which one have items that didn't migrate, the count of items. So you could say, I could tell you everything was migrated yesterday, it should be there, right? And it really helps them solve those cases that come in a lot faster. And that is a very, very important part of a project when you're talking about a sizable project. If you're 100 user, it's not a problem. If you are 50,000 user, this is a significant challenge to deal with. So
great.
Yep.
So Thomas, that's actually all the questions that we had. So we'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this webinar. If you'd like to talk to us more about the solution that we have, or even something on this topic that came up, we're happy to help. Please feel free to reach out to us. Enjoy the rest of your day.